But what goes on in these homeless shelters? Who ensures that people experiencing homelessness are treated with dignity and respect and that their rights are not violated? What is the standard for treatment of persons in our shelters? How do we ensure the same standard of care across all shelters in Minnesota? We're going to answer those questions as we explore what caused Street Voices of Change to create the Shelter Residents Bill of Rights and launch a campaign calling for the implementation of enforceable minimum standards of care for shelter residents in Minnesota.
When it came to staff being disrespectful to them, not being listened to, uh, things that related to case management, not keeping appointments, um, assessment issues, people being assessed and then not being matched for appropriate housing, uh, being given the runaround, going through the whole application process only to be denied. Um, Storage was always an issue. We constantly heard, I mean, it was like you had to carry everything just to the front desk,
Mm.
or you run the risk of things being stolen, to the bathroom. Uh, Not only to mention getting up, having appointments, interviews, doctor's appointments, and having to lug everything you got with you at that time. You know, just a burden in itself, period. Uh,
Yeah. So in those early days of Street Voices, yeah, we did gather around. Folks would come and they would say, "This thing happened to me last night," and in the shelter, and then somebody else would say, "Oh, that thing happened to me 2 weeks ago," and folks would start to say, "Okay, so these are the hard things that we struggle with, right?" We had to make a rule pretty early in the history of Street Voices of Change that you got one good solid meeting to really talk about and vent about one particular topic, or to talk about one thing that happened to you and really get it out and really feel like there was some release with that. But then the second meeting, we had to start talking about how to fix it. So there was always this rule of, you can bring your experiences, you can bring your heart, you can bring the things that are painful, and we we're not going to spend every single meeting in kind of venting mode or re-traumatization for one another, but we're going to actually now do something about it. What do you want done? What do you want done to make it right? What would happen when you go back into shelter tonight that would fix this experience? So, and folks had a lot more energy around fixing it than they had then about um, kind of re-victimizing and dwelling in that. We really, really worked very hard with each other to say, we have agency.
Mhm.
Can change the system. We can fix these things, because oftentimes what we heard was, well, it's always been that way. It's just always been that way. And what we wanted to say over and over to each other is, and it doesn't need to always be that way. It can stop now.
Sure. So there are so many good things about it. It's really specific. It was concrete and measurable. So before the Bill of Rights was shared with the providers, like I might or we would have an idea about what we think we need to do, but then that also feels kind of like paternalistic. It's so helpful to know that this is what the folks who are using shelter want and need. So in that way, it was fantastic, because then we knew what our marks were, what we were shooting for. But in addition, it provides this great leverage for conversations around funding, for conversations around programming, resources, all those kinds of things. So in my view, it's been a fantastic thing to have.
Great. Never thought of it that way. but I'm glad it is something which shelter providers can use to help them as they improve conditions. So tell me then, how did the Bill of Rights then influence your operations at Harbor Lights Shelter?
Sure. Well, one of the great things about the Shelter Bill of Rights, about the work that Street Voices of Change has done to advocate for users of shelter with Hennepin County, is that Hennepin County did join in that belief and value for dignity, dignified, safe shelter for people. And so one of the things that has happened at the Harbor Light just in the last few months is we just finished a huge renovation of our largest overnight sleeping space called Safe Bay. It was $1 million renovation. And I know in my bones that we wouldn't have gotten that funding if the Shelter Bill of Rights and the advocacy hadn't already been out there, so that Hennepin County was absolutely on board. It came from COVID funding, but the stage was already set for us to be able to put this proposal forward and for Hennepin County to say yes. And that's all because of the work of this group. I believe that 100%.
Well, thank you.
Well, I mean, I think the good thing was that I think both providers and people with lived experience and residents of shelter all agreed something needs to change. So that was a good starting point when we all agree that we need change. But then the specifics are a little more complicated, because I think the major consideration was really balancing the strong desire to create a legal Bill of Rights, a statutory Bill of Rights, with the recognition that if we overregulate, that could lead to existing shelters closing, which of course would be counterproductive. So that was one of the real considerations. And the other consideration is the real complexity of actually moving an idea and putting it into legislative language, a bill, and then moving it through the very arduous and complex legislative process.
I've entered your information. We will also invite you, if you have not, if you just go to the Align Minneapolis website, alignminneapolis.org, automatically you'll be invited to sign up to become an Align ally. And in that way, you will receive relevant information pertaining to this bill and the other matters that Align Minneapolis and Street Voices of Change are working on. So look out for the action alerts that concerning the Shelter Residents Bill of Rights. If you haven't signed up yet, please become an ally. Just also